Hello and welcome to The Edge, where we'll take an in-depth analysis of today's top stories by looking beyond the edge. We'll bring you not just the facts, but also deep insights into the topics with expert opinions and social media reactions. Let's make a start with our look beyond the edge. Taliban says that overnight fighting allowed the group to take control of the last holdout province, PANJSHIR. They are now in complete control of Afghanistan. The Taliban spokesman also reiterated that the rights of women will be maintained. Diplomatic channels will be open to engage with the international community. But what is the legitimacy of these statements? Can we expect peace and stability under the Taliban's rule this time around? Elite soldiers staged an uprising in Guinea's capital on Sunday, and President CONDE was seen captured and surrounded by soldiers. Guinea's state television was also seized, where soldiers announced that political decision-making would return to the hands of the people of Guinea. The country remains divided between the supporters of the government and those who say they want change. What sort of changes are the people of Guinea expecting? And a newly released analysis says that wealthy countries could potentially have a surplus of more than 1 billion COVID-19 vaccine doses available by the end of the year that are not designated as donations to poorer nations, even as vaccine inequality has been denounced by many prominent health figures and officials. Can the COVAX vaccine sharing scheme still be the solution for this problem? And these are the top three stories that we'll be taking a look at today from Beyond the Edge. Taliban's inner workings and leadership have always been largely shrouded in secrecy. But our following infographic gives an overview of the key figures in the movement as the group regains power and takes over the country again after 2 decades. Taliban spokesman Zabihullah Mujahid called for unity on Monday after claiming victory over opposition forces in the PANJSHIR Valley, northeast of Kabul.
The Taliban have taken complete control of PANJSHIR province. Footage showed Taliban members standing in front of the gate of the PANJSHIR provincial governor's compound. The PANJSHIR Valley was the last region not under Taliban control following the group's blitz across Afghanistan.
The Mujahideen forces are engaged in the purging of the PANJSHIR province. The capital of the PANJSHIR province is under control of the Mujahideen. The enemy did suffer a lot of damages, but the Mujahideen did not suffer any damages.
Armed fighters allied against the Taliban described the Taliban's claim of victory as false, pledging to continue fighting. The whereabouts of resistance leader Ahmed Massoud and Amrullah Saleh were not immediately known. Saleh, the former vice president, declared himself acting president after President Ashraf Ghani fled the country following the Taliban takeover last month. Taliban spokesman Zabihullah Mujahid called for unity among Afghans after claiming victory over resistance forces in the PANJSHIR Valley.
If anyone takes up arms, takes the names of resistance and rights, without a doubt, he is the enemy of the whole country and our people. Because the people do not want the war to continue, and there is no reason for anyone to continue the war. So the people need to know the Islamic Emirate ended the war, and we must all work for prosperity and the preservation of the freedom.
And I'm joined live from London in England by Azam Tamimi, who's a political analyst. Azam, thank you so much for joining us here today on The Edge. We got two diametrically opposed statements. On the one hand, the Taliban spokesman saying our country is completely out of the vortex of war. And on the other hand, a spokesman for the National Resistance Front in Afghanistan, the NRF, saying that the resistance is all over the valley of PANJSHIR. What can we understand of the current situation between these two parties?
Well, on the basis of a statement released by Ahmad Massoud himself, I think it was an audio message. I haven't heard the message myself, but I saw a report about it. He conceded defeat. He admitted that his forces were defeated, and he claimed that he appealed to the Taliban to accept negotiations with or through a mediation offered by the scholars, as he put it. Mm-hmm. But the Taliban refused. And of course, the Taliban have every right to refuse because he was earlier offered the opportunity to just lay arms and allow the country to proceed after it was liberated from the Americans. But regrettably, he fell for certain promises made by we know for sure at least one European country and one Gulf country, and led a mutiny. And he was a fool because the Taliban defeated the Americans. I don't know how it occurred to him that he could challenge them.
Is it perhaps the history of the Panjshir Valley, which has a reputation going back to Soviet times, maybe even before? In fact, definitely before, back to even to British occupation, of being a region where resistance takes a last stand?
Well, that is true, of course. The topography and the geography of the valley makes it in a good defensive position. However, that's when you are fighting an invading power, when you're fighting foreign occupiers. Definitely, you cannot compare the force that Ahmad Massoud only a few days ago assembled in order to create havoc in the country with the defenders of the country against British colonialism and then against Soviet occupation. Mm-hmm.
So it's a brave stand, but a foolish one from your perspective. Now, the opportunity for at this time for political and diplomatic dialogue between the parties couldn't be at a better moment, I imagine, because the Taliban are forming a government, and if the National Resistance Front could find a way to allow themselves to negotiate with the Taliban, then that would, I imagine, bring a more positive way forward for the whole of Afghanistan.
Well, if I were in a leading position within the Taliban, I wouldn't accept anything from that front because they took arms, they defied the liberators of the country, they accepted promises from the French and from the Emiratis, probably accepted money as well. So they took a position of treason, and now they are defeated. So why should they be given any platform? They just have to surrender and become citizens like everybody else. I don't think that they have the right to share in power after they rejected the offer made to them much earlier by the Taliban.
So what is the way forward at this time? The Taliban is forming its government. Will they be working, as we've been led to believe, with other groups inside Afghanistan to bring a new face to themselves and the country in comparison with what was there in 2001?
That's what we hear from spokespersons of the Taliban. That's what they say they intend to do. And I think it is in their best interests and the interests of Afghanistan to recognize that Afghanistan is a multi-ethnic, multiracial, multi-sectarian nation. And therefore, you need to involve as many components of the population as possible. But of course, everybody recognizes that it was the Taliban who liberated the country from the Americans, and therefore they are in a position to lead, and they should be given the opportunity to lead the country, to unite it, and to enable it to stand on its feet.
Now, the other important issue in Afghanistan is, of course, the humanitarian crisis that already exists and has existed for some time. The United Nations has said that the Taliban has pledged the safety and security of humanitarian staff. How important is this? And in terms of the international community, what do they want to see happening in Taliban to enable humanitarian aid to flow into the country and for other financial aid to come back to the country?
Apparently, the Taliban are welcoming foreign aid, and they're welcoming Qatari aid, for instance. Qatar is dispatching a flight every day to Kabul, on board which there is humanitarian aid and various equipment that are needed to rebuild the airport and make it possible and make it ready for traffic again. So if Qatar is able to do this, I'm sure that other willing parties will be able to do it, provided it is purely humanitarian, definitely.
Well, let's hope that that aid begins to move soon and that the country begins to stand back on its feet again. Azam Tamimi, thank you so much for joining us here today on The Edge. Now, let's move on to another crisis-driven country, Guinea. Alpha Condé won a third presidential term in Guinea in a violently disputed election last October. Our following infographic has more about developments in the country. Soldiers who staged an uprising in Guinea's capital have dissolved the constitution and the government in the West African state. Our video shared on social media showed the country's president, Alpha Condé, being detained by army special forces.
Soldiers in Guinea staged an uprising in the capital on Sunday. They claim to have dissolved the constitution and the West African state's government. One unidentified soldier, draped in Guinea's national flag, said the group planned to form a transitional government and that further details would be given later. Meanwhile, videos appearing to show the country's president, Alpha Condé, being detained by army special forces circulated on social media. Several sources have claimed an elite national army unit led by a former French legionnaire, Mamadi Doumbouya, was behind the unrest.
We have decided, after taking the president, who is with us now, to dissolve the current constitution. We also decided to dissolve the government, to close the land and air borders. We call on our brothers in arms to unite in order to respond to the legitimate aspirations of the people of Guinea. We also invite everyone to stay in their bases and continue their usual activities. We will not make the same mistakes as in the past.
Right now, though, it's not immediately clear who holds power. The Guinean Defence Ministry said the attack on the palace by mutinous forces and an attempted insurgency had been put down. Earlier, videos shared on social media showed military vehicles patrolling Conakry's streets. One military source said the only bridge connecting the mainland to the Khartoum neighbourhood, which houses the palace and most government ministries, had been sealed off. That source added that many soldiers, some heavily armed, were also posted around the palace.
I'm now joined from Accra in Ghana by journalist Isaac Kelesdin. Isaac, thank you so much for joining us here today on The Edge. Now, events have moved on very quickly in Ghana, in Guinea. Can you tell us what is the current situation there?
So Guinea since yesterday has actually been in some sort of crisis. It was unexpected. Not everyone really was expecting that Sunday morning there will be gunshots, and of course then the news came in that the gunshots were heard around the presidential palace, and then we have images of Alpha Conde being surrounded by soldiers, which obviously tells you that there is a coup. And since then, a lot of people are coming to terms with what has happened and trying to see what really will be the way forward for the country. Today, we've seen the soldiers come out to hold a meeting with the cabinet ministers who were part of the Alpha Conde government and have actually told them that there's not going to be a witch hunt, but anyone who really has gone wrong, the right thing will be done in terms of seeking justice for all Guineans. But also they've stopped them from traveling outside the country, so they asked them to submit their passports for the meantime. And what we know the soldiers have said is that in the coming weeks, they'll be announcing a transition government to ensure that there's a transition from the current situation to a democratic dispensation. They've asked people to go about their daily duties. And of course, we know there's a curfew already in place. 8 p.m. local time, people ought to stay indoor. So basically, these are some of the things that have happened since Sunday morning when those gunshots were heard.
Well, many countries around the world, including Turkey, have condemned the action of a coup, saying that democratic means should be pursued. Now, there is a constitution in the country. In fact, it was changed to enable Conte to take a third term as president, 83-year-old man, to extend his power. Well, two questions. Why weren't those democratic means used to change the government rather than hold a coup, do you think? And secondly, what do the people want at this time?
So for the first question, well, Guineans were not asking for a military takeover, and they were not expecting that. They really protested Alpha Conde's decision to go for a third term through protests, even before the referendum that changed the constitution to give him that opportunity to contest last year's election. So they have done that. They've expressed their concerns. Even after the referendum and in the election, we've seen protests. Many people have been killed. So that is what they believe could stop him from getting the third term protest, civil disobedience, or trying to ensure that they express their anger. The coup was carried out by the soldiers, but many people, again, to answer the second question, many people seem to be happy. You can see images of them on the streets jubilating because there's been that level of anger that the soldiers have fed on. And so even though they are not ready and willing to have soldiers govern them, they think that this is a breather for them. They think that toppling Alpha Conde, in a way, helps to reset the country. Mind you, many people have been disappointed by Alpha Conde because he came in 2010 promising a lot, and they thought that once his tenure ended, the second term ended, that would have been it. But they thought that his move to get a third term seems to show that he's power drunk, and so they seem to be happy with this coup.
And like many African countries, Guinea is a resource-rich country, and I think one of the arguments Doumbouya, who headed the special unit that fomented the coup said that not enough of that is going to the people. So do you imagine that in the future that Guinea might see an administration that could share wealth better amongst the people, amongst the country?
Well, that would be the hope. And I think that the concern for many is that Guinea, like many African countries, like you said, still continue to face economic challenges, even though they have natural mineral resources that could that should be actually helping to lift them up from poverty. And so whichever government comes will still have to fulfill that promise of ensuring that people benefit from the resources they have. You can't tell whether the military leaders will get that done. But of course, they've said that every activity in terms of mining of bauxite should continue. They've said that the coup doesn't disrupt that because they know how important the sector is for the economy. So for now, we cannot tell whether subsequent governments will fulfill this aspiration of ordinary Guineans. It is the hope that that is what governments should do to ensure that they manage the resources to benefit all citizens. And I think that in the coming weeks and months, as we begin to see what kind of shape the government will be taking in terms of the transitional government, and even get into restoration of a democratic dispensation, I'm sure that citizens will hope that their lives will improve and will be better as the years go by.
Well, it's a very fluid situation in Guinea at the moment. Isaac Khaled, I want to thank you so much for joining us here today on The Edge and bringing us right up to date. Thank you. We'll keep watching. And we will indeed keep watching the developments in Guinea. And now let's move on to our final topic. Distributing the vaccines against COVID-19 is the most pressing challenge of our time. And nobody wins the race until everyone is protected. This infographic shows the importance of the COVAX vaccine sharing facility. The issue of vaccine inequality has resurfaced once again as new findings show richer nations are overstocked with jabs that could be rolled out and benefit the Southern Hemisphere.
New analysis shows that wealthy countries could potentially have a surplus of more than 1 billion doses of COVID-19 vaccines by the end of the year that are not designated as donations to poorer nations. The data shows that vaccine stocks in Western countries have reached 500 million, with 360 million not earmarked for donations. By the end of the year, these countries will have a potential of 1.2 billion surplus vaccine shots, with the overwhelming majority not earmarked for donations. Vaccine inequality has been denounced by many prominent health figures and officials, while COVAX had initially aimed to provide 2 billion to people in 190 countries this year. However, wealthy countries' deals with vaccine manufacturers have limited the vaccine's availability to COVAX and led to vaccine hoarding.
And I'm joined live from Bath in England by Dr. Bharat Pankhania, who's a senior clinical lecturer at the University of Exeter Medical School. Dr. Pankhania, thank you so much for joining us here again today on The Edge. And
my pleasure.
After a long summer, the news that 1.2 billion coronavirus doses that have been put on the shelf by countries around the world might have collected by the end of the year. This is a shocking figure for vaccines that aren't being delivered into the arms of people.
It's worse than shocking, Andy, because we all know that we are not well unless everybody else is well too. And this is a failure to work and think globally and deliver globally, despite making promises. Furthermore, it is also a clear indicator of failings, which is the poorer nations have been kept in the receive donations mode, receive little gifts and keep them vulnerable to receiving gifts. What we should have done, what we need to do is also enable poorer countries who have the technology, who have the ability to also manufacture the vaccines, create employment, create ability to make and manufacture vaccines. So it is a double failing. One, a failure to donate, and a second, a failure to enable the countries in other parts of the world to manufacture them, even if it is to manufacture them under license and supervision.
And in terms of the manufacturing under license and supervision, now this would obviously open some doors, but it still doesn't negate the fact that countries are taking hold of these vaccines and not distributing them. This is a very strange imbalance, is it not?
It's a terrible imbalance because the pharmaceutical companies were able to manufacture and invent and do all the trials and succeed with the trials with public money. Having succeeded in making the vaccines, they then go ahead and receive orders. And the orders all come from the richer nations, Canada, United States, European Union, United Kingdom, Israel. And they agree to supply on a first-come, first-based basis. And then when the poorer nations, the African nations, go to the vaccine manufacturers and say, we would also like to buy the vaccines, the vaccine manufacturer says, sorry, the order book for 2021 is full. We cannot provide you with any vaccines until next year. So it is really a failing at many, many levels, government levels, international levels, and pharmaceutical companies taking orders on a first-come, first-served basis.
Now, unusually, in other situations where there is a disparity like this, there are penalties involved, and I can't think of a specific example right now, but if this were to happen in another field, then there would be penalties against those hoarders. Is the problem that it is very much a goodwill effort, looking at health policy internationally, and does that need to change in the future?
It very much needs to change in the future. The World Health Organization, Gavi, and other international organizations set up to serve all member states needs to be strengthened, better supported, and better funded. Unfortunately, for quite a long time, we had President Trump from the United States shutting all the doors and putting America first policy. And to be truthful, the European Union and the UK were also, whilst not explicitly saying so, doing a EU-UK first policy. We need to change this. And if we do not, eventually we will get non-cooperation from other nations. So when we go to the other nations and say, reduce your carbon footprint, we have got a global warming emergency, they will say, not talking to you.
So this is really something that we've got to get our heads together. Unfortunately, those powerful nations that we talk about, if they don't like something that's being imposed on them, they walk away from the deal. So this really is a cry to humanity to get our act together and in so many areas, as you mentioned, climate change as well, but that's a different topic. Now, interestingly, the former British Prime Minister Gordon Brown has referred to this as an arms race, a different, not an arms of munitions, but getting vaccines into the arms of people. How true are those words?
It's very much true, and Gordon Brown is doing a sterling job in advocating that we donate and use the vaccines that we have in our armamentum to help and enable other nations to also benefit from what we have stockpiled and suppress infections internationally. It is a very good initiative. I just hope that he will be successful.
Well, let's hope that this notion of a healthy arms race catches on and that this pandemic is brought to a close as soon as possible. Dr. Bharat Pankhania, that's all we've got time for today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today on The Edge. Now, our analysts have provided their insights on today's top stories. Let's have a roundup of what they had to say. Before closing our programme, let's take a look at social media to hear your voices and reactions on today's top story shared with the hashtag Guinea. And here's what you had to say about Guinea on Twitter. Milano says, the big question, why is Africa swiftly becoming a coup d'etat hub? Africa has recorded 38 attempted coup d'etat from 2010 to 2021. And Abdulrahish Musa says, inasmuch as the coup in Guinea is condemnable, the sad truth is some African leaders see their position as a dynasty where they can stay as long as they wish, coupled with wicked and repressive economic policies that further impoverish the citizenry. And Senator Shehusani says what has happened in Guinea-Conakry is simply a military coup. President Alpha Conde recently tampered with the constitution that enabled him to contest for the third term, and the parliament increased his earnings. Military rule refused to be obsolete in West Africa. Let's now take a look at our video of the day, which tells the story of Isra Jarbiz, who was imprisoned 6 years ago by the Israeli occupation while suffering from a critical injury. That's all from this episode of The Edge with me, Andy Boyns. Stay tuned as we'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth analysis on the top stories and a look beyond the edge.